From the Cronkite studios in downtown Phoenix, this is Cronkite News.
Defense Secretary James Mattis is expected to sign a deployment order that would send 800 or more troops to the Mexican border as thousands of migrants caravan towards the U.S.
Plus, as the November midterm election approaches, we give you a deeper look into one of Arizona's propositions. Join us as we check the facts regarding Prop 127.
And we're taking a look at the history of athlete protests by talking to 2 Olympic medalists. Coming up.
Cronkite News starts now.
Good evening and welcome to Cronkite News on Arizona PBS. I'm Samantha Lomibao.
And I'm John Cardinelli. Thank you for joining us. A caravan of thousands of migrants is headed towards the U.S. border from Central America.
U.S. Defense Secretary James Mattis is expected to sign a deployment order that would send 800 troops to the Mexican border to join the National Guard, which has already been deployed. Cronkite News reporter Holly Bernstein is tracking the latest.
These troops could arrive as early as next week, but as of yet, the order has not been signed.
Wait till you see what happens over the next couple of weeks. You're going to see a very secure border. You just watch. Just watch. Very secure. And the military is ready. They're all set.
U.S. Defense Secretary James Mattis is responding to a request from President Donald Trump. Trump is calling the caravan of immigrants heading to the border a national emergency. Brian Kovodrilis is one of those in the caravan. He says he spent most of his life in Texas until he was deported to Honduras a few weeks ago. He's walking back to reunite with his 3-year-old daughter.
She's the one who actually needs me the most, so, and I don't want her to grow without me.
Others hope for a better future.
There isn't any work there. We have nothing to live on.
The caravan is about 1,000 miles from the border. There are already more than 400 National Guard troops deployed along the Arizona-Mexico border in the Tucson sector, according to Customs and Border Protection. The troops will not be authorized to use lethal force to stop the migrants. The plan is for them to provide fencing, wall materials, and other technical support. This summer, additional funding for the National Guard troops was approved by the U.S. Department of Defense to keep them at the border through September 2019. And a few hundred migrants who have reached Mexico voluntarily agreed to return to their home countries. But Mexican immigration officials have started to process asylum requests for nearly 3,000 Central Americans. In the broadcast center, Holly Bernstein, Cronkite News.
More packages containing pipe bombs were sent out to public figures today following yesterday's scare. 2 packages were sent to former Vice President Joe Biden in Delaware, and another was found in New York sent to actor Robert De Niro. The federal government and the New York Police Department are still investigating the matter regardless of politics.
Along with our partners on our Joint Terrorist Task Force, the FBI, the Secret Service, the ATF, the state police, and others, we are investigating all of these with great precision, and we will identify and arrest a person or persons responsible for these cowardly acts. Law enforcement professionals do not care about the politics behind acts of terrorism or hate. What we do care about is keeping the public safe.
Pipe bombs addressed to Hillary Clinton, former President Barack Obama, former CIA Director John Brennan, and former Attorney General Eric Holder were intercepted yesterday, bringing the total to 10 this week. The FBI warns that more packages may be found.
It turns out an evacuation at the Cannon House office building on Capitol Hill was not related to any bomb threat, but an alarm for a malfunctioning electrical panel. Even so, the evacuation alert was enough to rattle the nerves of people in the building, including staffers of Representative Tom O'Halloran's office.
I think it was the first thing on everybody's mind. I think that's inevitable when we have high-profile people who work in this office.
The U.S. House of Representatives is in recess, and most lawmakers are back in their district ahead of the midterm elections.
Vice President Mike Pence will be in Yuma tomorrow to stump for Martha McSally in Arizona's high-profile Senate race. Pence is in Florida today, but will fly to Arizona tomorrow for an evening rally to support the Republican candidate. Pence's visit comes just 1 week after President Trump held a McSally campaign rally in Mesa.
The latest tally on early voting in Arizona shows that about 35% of the expected ballots have already been received by the state. According to the Secretary of State's office, about 761,000 Arizona voters have cast their ballots already. About 44% of those early ballots were registered Republicans, and about 33% were registered Democrats. 22.5% of the ballots were designated independent or other. An analyst with the Secretary of State is also tracking the voter demographics as each batch of ballots are processed. In the last day, he says the voters sending early ballots have skewed more female and more Democratic.
Arizona Attorney General Mark Brnovich has filed a defamation lawsuit against Clean Energy for a Healthy Arizona. Brnovich accuses California billionaire Tom Steyer and other community members of funding a defamatory and misleading advertising campaign against him. Brnovich held a news conference where he discussed the $3.6 million ad campaign, which accused him of accepting $425,000 from APS. The ads claim that led Brnovich to change the wording on the clean energy ballot initiative Proposition 127.
If you want to talk about my record, that's fine. Let's have that conversation. But do not make up information. Do not create false facts in order to impugn my reputation. And I will tell you, I was compelled to file this lawsuit when I think about people like my mother. This is an attack not only on me, it's an attack on the Brnovich name.
The lawsuit says Brnovich and his campaign received no contributions, donations, or other money from APS. Clean Energy spokesman DJ Quinlan told the Arizona Republic today, quote, Brnovich's lawsuit will fail.
Millions of dollars have poured into the fight for and against Proposition 127. The initiative would regulate state utility companies to produce 50% of their energy from renewable sources, like wind and solar. There are a lot of claims about Prop 127. We sent Cronkite News reporter Rachel Charlton to fact-check one of them.
The claim is this: Arizona's energy mix is already 50% clean. I traced this statement back to an opinion piece by former Arizona Senator Steve Pierce, a rancher in Prescott. Pierce's anti-Prop 127 op-ed was published last month in the Prescott Daily Courier. Matthew Benson, a spokesman for Arizonans for Affordable Electricity, retweeted an excerpt from Pierce's op-ed. When I asked Pierce where that claim came from, he couldn't provide a source, and he declined interview requests, citing his busy schedule. So is Arizona's energy mix 50% clean? Nuclear energy accounts for about 22.5%, and renewables are about 10%. That's according to the Energy Information Administration. Those numbers add up to slightly more than 32%, not 50%. But here's the thing, this fact check really comes down to one word: clean.
When people hear clean, I think a lot of times they do think about renewable energy, but it's not being used that way in this context.
Amanda Ormond used to direct the now defunct Arizona Energy Office.
Through policy that's being considered at the Arizona Corporation Commission and then also by Arizona Public Service Company itself, the word clean includes nuclear energy.
Proposition 127 does not include nuclear energy in the ballot language. University of Utah law professor Lincoln Davies says clean is often a catch-all for renewable energy.
What you're trying to do is to promote renewables, then clean doesn't capture nuclear. But if what you're talking about is you're trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions or mitigate climate change, then using clean to include nuclear certainly is a fair characterization.
Nuclear energy is often referred to as clean energy because it has effectively zero greenhouse gas emissions in generating electricity. However, most people associate the word clean with renewable energy, which nuclear is not. Nuclear material is a non-renewable resource. Davies said that the language used in these claims should be clear and reflect the policy goals. It's language like the word clean that ASU environmental and sustainability professor of law Troy Rule says can mislead voters.
To refer to nuclear power from Palo Verde as clean might give voters an impression that it is on par in the same way that wind and solar are, when that's just simply not the case.
So this claim that Arizona's energy mix is already 50% clean is hard to fact check. If you combine nuclear with renewables, it still doesn't add up to 50% of Arizona's current energy makeup. So that claim is false. As for the word clean, it often gets associated with renewables, but the definitions are different. To be clear, Prop 127 is about renewable energy, like solar, wind, geothermal, not nuclear. In the Broadcast Center, Rachel Charlton, Cronkite News.
If you want more facts related to our key Arizona midterm races and propositions, our Cronkite News team has you covered. We have a special section on our website dedicated to Election 2018. Our team compiled candidate profiles and in-depth reports on ballot initiatives. You can check it out at cronkitenews.azpbs.org.
The cost of higher education is enough to deter students anywhere from pursuing a college degree.
Coming up on Cronkite News, we take a look at the problem of student debt, not just within our state, but all across the nation.
Plus, new data from federal health officials show the seasonal flu is taking a bigger toll because people are skipping their flu shots.
I'm Judy Woodruff, anchor and managing editor of the PBS NewsHour. The journalists of tomorrow face a fast-changing media landscape, but quality news remains vitally important to our communities, our country, and our world. At ASU's Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication, students learn solid, reliable reporting, holding the powerful accountable, and rebuilding the public's trust. The Cronkite School and Arizona PBS, preparing the next generation for a stronger future of journalism.
As journalists at Cronkite News, we report on stories that matter to you by focusing on the local impact. We dig deeper and work tirelessly to keep you informed.
Live in Wickerburg.
Live in Los Angeles.
In Cleveland. In Washington. In Louisville.
From Jerusalem. Live in Philadelphia.
From around the world to right here in Phoenix.
At Cronkite News, we report the facts and stick to the truth.
The White House and the U.S. Health and Human Services Department announced today what they call historic action to bring down the price of prescription drugs and change the way Medicare would pay for more expensive medications. The proposal calls for certain drugs administered in doctors' offices to a payment level based on international prices instead of domestic. The health department says overall savings to programs like Medicare and to patients would total more than $17 billion over 5 years. But the proposal is structured as an experiment and would only apply to half the country. And experts say drug makers are sure to push back, arguing that this would be like adopting price controls. President Trump said the mission is to end subsidizing lower prices for prescription drugs in foreign countries through higher prices in the U.S. A report released by Health and Human Services today found that pharmaceutical manufacturers charge 1.8 times more for Part B drugs in the U.S. compared to other nations.
A new report from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says that last year's flu season was the deadliest in decades, due in part to fewer adults getting flu shots. The report says vaccination coverage among adults was about 37%, down 6 percentage points from the previous flu season. Meanwhile, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration has approved a new flu drug for the first time in nearly 20 years. Xofluza can be used on patients 12 and older who've been showing symptoms for no more than 48 hours. Officials stress that while this additional treatment option is important, it's not a replacement for a yearly vaccine.
Faith leaders across Arizona now know how to use the life-saving opioid overdose reversal medication. Today, I attended a training focused on administering Narcan to help those battling addiction.
Dozens of faith leaders from all over Arizona decided to take action against the opioid epidemic.
So much needs to be done for young people before drugs become the answer.
The Attorney General's office held a training about Narcan to help combat overdoses.
All the medication is from here to here. It goes intranasal. So you just set it maybe about that much into the nasal cavity and then push.
According to the Arizona Department of Health Services, there have been more than 14,000 opioid overdoses over the past 15 months in Arizona alone. Clergy member Kim Sterner says her son Jonathan died of an opioid overdose in 2016.
He was in the ER and his dealer came into the ER and Jonathan shot up while he was in the hospital. He was on life support for 4 days and then we finally just took him off. It ended up being his birthday.
Fred Taylor from the Attorney General's office says this training can save lives.
There are going to be cases and times when somebody might OD in church or they're going to OD in and around the church. So we're equipping people for the future.
The Attorney General's office has trained more than 300 members of law enforcement on how to administer Narcan so far.
Student debt affects millions of people across the country.
Coming up on Cronkite News, we take a look at how Arizona ranks compared to states across the nation and the possible solutions to solve it.
It's a lot cooler today than it was yesterday, but we're gonna warm up a little bit this weekend. More after the break.
By the year 2050, there will be more plastic in the ocean than fish. Before Professor Halden, I had an insane amount of passion, but I almost felt helpless because I didn't know how to use it. Professor Halden gave me a chance to make a difference. Being at a place like ASU allows you to take these big leaps. Ultimately, the biggest problems in the world cannot be solved alone.
Cronkite News, weeknights at 5 on Arizona PBS.
Officially from 36, and he hooks it in! Arizona State wins! Heaving one deep, and it is caught! Jalen Strong! Do you believe it?
Experts are weighing in on the looming amount of student loan debt that often comes with attending college. And our Washington, D.C. bureau, Cronkite News reporter Imani Stevens is mapping out student debt across the state of Arizona and the nation.
I have to go to college and I have to take on debt to get there.
If there's any doubt about student debt, the third installment of this map shows that it is a national problem. The dark shades of purple indicates areas where up to 10% of students are delinquent, what they call extremely high rates of delinquency. And parts of Arizona are really purple.
When I'm taking a look at the Phoenix area, what I do see matches the things that we're seeing in other cities, which is that as income decreases, we're seeing higher levels of student loan delinquency and lower average balances.
They say a closer look at the map reveals an even bigger problem.
So as we were looking at the maps, you probably noticed two important things. That debt burden is highest in areas where employment rates are low, an indicator of weak labor market conditions. And debt burden is also high in zip codes that have high average loan balances.
And she said those are the people who need help the most.
It's people who are trying to climb to the middle class and really take advantage of higher education's promise that are also seeing it go unfulfilled.
The map breaks it down by those that identify as African American or Latino to show delinquency levels for those populations.
We're seeing that African American borrowers in particular are suffering from really high default rates. About 50% of African American borrowers are defaulting. Their rates are also extraordinarily high, even if they have a bachelor's degree.
There are solutions, Morgan says, and that may help people pay off their student loans.
We need to set some new bars that look at not just are you able to repay your debt, but are you able to actually be successful and do the things that we thought people ought to be able to do with a college degree.
In Washington, Imani Stevens, Cronkite News.
The experts say that the localized data can serve as a tool to pinpoint the rise of student debt and make changes on the policy level.
A $1 million Powerball ticket was sold at a gas station in Surprise yesterday. According to Arizona lottery officials, the ticket matched all 5 numbers except the Powerball. The winner has not come forward. The Powerball is now an estimated $750 million with the next drawing on Saturday.
I can't believe it, Sammy. We're just 1 week away from November, but it really doesn't feel like it outside.
No, it definitely seems to be warming up. Let's check in with Micah Bledsoe for the weather forecast.
It is warming up. Currently right now, it's a lot cooler than it was yesterday, but later on in our forecast, we'll see that it's warming up over the weekend. Clouds and winds are moving eastward out of Arizona, so it's a bit windy outside, but that's not too much to worry about. Over the next 8 hours, we'll experience a slight decrease in temperatures as we get ready for the evening. Tomorrow, highs in the 88s here in Phoenix, up north 67 in Page. Out in the west, we have high temperatures in the 90s. Low temperatures here in Phoenix, they will be 64 degrees. And this weekend is the great weekend to go to the fair because Sunday is the last day. Saturday, it'll be 90 degrees and nice and sunny. This weekend, it'll be warm, like I said, and later throughout the week, it'll drop down a little bit. We'll get into the 70s and experience lows in the 50s. In the Cronkite Weather Center, Micah Bledsoe.
Athlete protests have been a common occurrence over the last few years, but they're far from new to headlines.
Coming up on Cronkite News.
Learn more about the history of athlete protests from two 1968 Olympians.
If you're looking for one show that tells you what happened that day in the world of business, it's NBR.
We saw a classic shipwreck.
Nordstrom's opening stores.
Triple-digit gains.
Crude climbs.
We're there to help our audience find new investment ideas.
The market still has room to go up.
Nightly Business Report is the longest-running business television program in history.
Weeknights at 10:30 on Arizona PBS.
I'm Matt Berry, ESPN Sports Center anchor and graduate of ASU's Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication. With its bachelor's and master's degrees in sports journalism, the Cronkite School is preparing the next generation of sports journalists to tell stories that matter, stories that excite, inspire, and inform. Cronkite immerses students in covering sports at all levels in one of the country's top sports markets. It's this hands-on experience under the guidance of award-winning sports media veterans that shape the top journalists of tomorrow.
Millions of people die every year from drinking dirty water. I would never have felt I had the ability to do something without ASU pushing me. We built filtration systems out of local materials with the people. To see those kids drink clean water for the first time, it's the most rewarding feeling that you can ever have. I went to ASU because I wanted to change the world. The thing I never would have expected is how the world would have changed me.
Here at Cronkite News, we have producers who craft shows that make an impact on our community. Our broadcasts allow students to be involved in all levels of production, from producing to directing. We are guided by highly respected professionals who mentor the journalists of tomorrow. From technical directing to teleprompting and beyond, our production crew works tirelessly to produce meaningful and award-winning shows. We are Cronkite News on Arizona PBS.
Although athlete protests have taken over headlines in the past few years, this type of activism has been making a powerful impact on sports for decades. Cronkite News reporter Justin Parham spoke to some past Olympic medalists about why the conversation has not changed.
On the Mexico City Olympics podium, John Carlos and Tommy Smith raised their fist in protest. In 2016, Colin Kaepernick decided to take a knee in protest. Despite almost 5 decades separating the events, both central figures believe their message was misinterpreted.
They changed the scenario from the Olympic Project for Human Rights and made it a Black Power movement. Just like Mr. Kaepernick said, I'm concerned about police brutality. They changed the scenario on that. Said he's unpatriotic, he's against the flag, he's against the military.
After their display, Carlos and Smith were asked to leave the game. But just as other NFL players have decided to take a knee with Kaepernick, Carlos and Smith were not the only ones to demonstrate at the games.
And I wore black shorts throughout the Olympic Games. That was my protest. We go and win these medals, they put us up on the pedestal. Oh, look, they did for the USA, and we come back, and we have no rights. After winning the gold medal in the relay, I dedicated my medals to Tommy and Carlos for what they did on their victory stand.
For many, it's hard to believe that 50 years after John Carlos and Tommy Smith raised their fists in protest, we're still having the conversation around race. But for some, this conversation will never end.
I gave a lecture before about 450 largely white
Americans. And I asked them, how many of you feel somewhat uncomfortable, or a great deal uncomfortable about athletes taking a knee? And about 3/4 of the hands went up. Then I asked them, how many of you would trade places with African Americans? Not a single hand went up. So they understand the message. They simply refuse to deal with it because it is so tied up with their identity, their privilege, and their power. And they don't want to discuss that.
Even though great strides have been made to repair race relations in the United States, there is still work to be done. In Phoenix, Justin Parham, Cronkite News.
In addition to Colin Kaepernick, sports figures like Eric Reed and LeBron James continue to use their platforms to address race relations in the United States.
Cronkite News is proud to be the news division of Arizona PBS. Here's what's coming up on Arizona Horizon and PBS NewsHour.
On the next Arizona Horizon, Arizona broadcast pioneer Ray Odom will talk about his career, his radio stations, and his encounters with major celebrities before they made it big. The next Arizona Horizon.
Paul Salmon in Longmont, Colorado. I would have taken the name Mr. Money Mustache, but this guy already had it. And what do?
Well, right now I'm just working my way through a 70-year retirement.
On the next PBS NewsHour.
That's it for Cronkite News tonight. Thanks for joining us.
For top Arizona stories anytime, go to cronkitenews.azpbs.org.